Today's episode is sponsored by Workwear and PPE Supplies. They cater for all your company's branded workwear, uniform and PPE needs. From head to toe protection, they've got you covered. Check out their exciting workwear bundle, which is only £99 and includes 9 items of clothing with free embroidery and setup. You can see their full range of products at www.ppe.co.uk or give their sales team a call on 01236 750 575. Regardless of the size of your organisation, they've got you covered.
So, hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Risking It All podcast. Today we are delighted to be joined by the CEO and co-founder of EnergyAid, Nick Sherman, all the way from sunny California. Thanks a lot for joining us, Nick. Good morning.
Yeah, Brian, Mary, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure, mate. So, like we do with every guest that's on our podcast, what we like to do, mate, is ask you to take us back to where it all began for young Nick. So tell us a bit about your upbringing in good old sunny California.
Yeah, born and raised Southern California. Not really going anywhere at this point. I have a 5-year-old and we've got our roots here in California. Not a lot of reasons to actually leave. I know there's a lot of political beliefs that people have and moving to Texas and Arizona, but I'm staying and I'm going to pay the taxes and I'm going to deal with all the homeless because the weather at 75 degrees with the exception of this week is unbeatable, and no humidity, no cold season. Those are all the reasons why I'm staying, and they're going to have to drag me out of here. Born and raised Southern California. I went to high school, Corona del Mar, Newport Beach, California. I played golf there. Went to a couple years of Cal State San Marcos, played golf there. At 21, I ended up getting into my stepfather's business. He was in deregulation in the late 90s, a company called Commonwealth. He was one of the largest providers of deregulation in the California market. Ended up moving nationwide to like a $250 million market cap a few years after he got out of it. And from there, he started a solar company in 2001 called GenSelf. GenSelf was one of the first companies to basically get into the market, get out of the market in about 2008. They sold to a company called Sunwise, which was basically the first CED distributor. They were CED before CED. For those of you who don't know who CED is, they're the largest basically distributor of solar products in the United States and probably multiple places at this point. Yeah. From there, I started in the business in 2006. I was answering phone calls, inside sales rep. I left about a year later, about a year before the sale. My stepdad told me this line. He said, it's really hard working for family, basically was the gist of it. And I knew I wanted to move on and plant my own roots in the industry. And he goes, well, Nicky boy, the only thing harder than working for family is family working for you. And he understood where I was coming from. And I understand where he's coming from now at this point in my life. I have my 24-year-old half-brother who works for us and earns every penny of what he does here. But, there's both sides of it, and you kind of understand both sides when it's happened both ways, right? So from there, I ended up going to a company called Peak Power Solutions. 23 years old, I was running basically the general manager of the operation side. We were the first, more or less, dealer model, working with Varango, GCI Energy, doing over 100 projects a month. And that was kind of the first, I guess you kind of call it the first Freedom Forever, where sales orgs were partnered up with an install org called Peak Power. 2012, I moved out, started my first company called PowerAid, failed dramatically, ended up kind of punting and making that an LLC that I ended up doing. I went from 20, 25 employees to back to one, which was myself, and ended up doing roofing for the solar industry for about 5-6 years. Partnered with another company, Guided Construction, for a couple years in 18 to 20. And that's where I kind of figured out, was kind of given the information on the service side and how big of an opportunity it was. And really didn't understand anything until I got into the service business 3 years ago. When you start looking at problems backwards, they become more complex. They also become more clear of what the real issue is. And that is that this industry continues to underestimate service liability, and we continue to fund old habits with new money. And what that means is we just don't learn from our mistakes. We continue to underestimate the service liability, and we continue to have to pay for those mistakes with new revenue.
Just on that one, Nick, there's so much that you've just said that I want to go back to, by the way, so I'm going to ask you some questions. That's amazing.
Yes.
The phrase service liability, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Is that failures with the way the products for solar are installed and set up? Is that failures with the grid, or is it something else that you mean by service liability?
Yeah, service liability is everything you pay post closing out a work order. So if you're on an accrual or cash basis and you close out and gap compliant on your financials, a lot of people think that the job's done, right? The costs are all incurred, the revenue has been realized. There's multiple ways that revenue can come backwards, right? Disputes on credit cards and stuff like that. There's tons of ways that cost can still keep coming. So when we talk about the service liability, that's the continued cost post, I guess, closeout on your financials. And it's definitely prevalent, right? You know, a roof leak a year later, whatever it may be. R&Rs, there's a bunch of these lease PPAs in the market that undervalued the cost or underestimated the cost of removing solar panels, fixing a roof, and putting solar panels back on the home. One of the infamous ones was the Solar City original agreements that were $500 one time over the course of your life of your system, your lease. Well, that cost a lot more than $500, and they've since adjusted those, and so have the other lease contributors in the market. But there's still a lot of cleanup from those past obligations. So that's just one example. I mean, I don't mean to call out Tesla here as a bad company or anything like that. They're a great company, but there's just one example of us underestimating. No one really captures their cost probably very well in this business. I think we have a lot of sales-centric people that are kind of been put into a rocket ship industry, and now we're having to pun a little bit, and it's different. And I think when you look at that, those people really tend to fail on estimating service liability or cost in the future. So that's kind of where we're at. Does that help answer your question, Barry, or is there more elaboration you'd like to?
Yeah, it does. It does. Do you think part of that problem that we can only talk from the eyes of the UK, which we're fairly well ingrained in the renewables market, but do you think some of that problem is, most of your financials is based on installing these systems or putting solar panels in, and that's where you're going to make your money? Are a lot of people in the US just focused on getting that installation and then forgetting about everything else? Is that kind of the driver behind some of the problems you see?
Yeah, I think revenue's been the driver in this industry for a while. If you look at the largest players that just passed here, SunPower, but Sunrun, Sonova, SunPower, Tesla, a lot of those giants have not made money. And just of recently, where they're now being financially coerced to have to do it with the market trends, the cost of capital has gone up so much, and the industry has pulled back so much with legislation and finance rates that they've been forced to kind of eat what they kill, which is a real business. And the tech stocks and .com booms of the 2001s, early 2000s, that's a lot of how this industry has been built, all about long-term customer valuation and really building up almost like this utility before they try to monetize it properly. Well, that has been kind of rug's been pulled underneath from them, and they're now in a position where they have to eat what they kill. And I think a lot of those companies aren't prepared to do that. But I think in doing so, that role model of top-line revenue focused, really not worried about the cost as much as they are about the revenue, because that's what drives the stock evaluation. So I think that's solving itself in a way, but that's been a lot of the guidance of what the newer entrepreneurs in the market have been looking at, and believing that because Sunrun, SunPower, and Sonova and the large companies in the U.S. market are doing that they should probably be doing that. And there's a lot of things they need to do better. There's a lot of things they shouldn't be doing that the Sunruns and SunPowers of the world. They don't have $400 million in convertible note loans that expire in 10 years. So, those things that Sunruns and the SunPower, Sonovas of the world do, those companies shouldn't be doing. They shouldn't be building out AI. for 1 million customers. They just don't have the capital long term to do that stuff. So I think, I think the forecasting of the liability is going to get better. I think when you get into an industry, it's now being financially coerced to have to make an operating income, have to make an EBITDA. I think the mindset changes and the people get more educated. And I think that's where we're kind of being put in now. So I think there's more good times ahead. And it's actually a really fun time when you're making money. And I think some of these companies are going to experience that part of it too.
Can I ask you a question, Nick? You skated over this pretty quickly, but the education system in the United States, and in particular California, where you were educated and went to school, and in the UK, a lot of entrepreneurs suggest that school isn't really set up to train you to be an entrepreneur. It's primarily created around creating workers rather than entrepreneurs. What is your experience of the education system in the United States like in that terms? Do you think that it's set up to encourage and prepare you for being an entrepreneur, or is it similar to the UK in the sense that it's more set up around creating workers?
That's a good question, Brian. The free market, United States, allows a lot of entrepreneurship just by the financial model of the U.S. free market. So I think it sets us up for the most important parts, which are you can do anything if you put your mind to it and put the effort in. There's not barriers, that there are in other countries. So in that aspect, I think it has prepared us for success. The schooling systems, I think people kind of like Darwinistic find their highest level. I went to school for a year or two and it wasn't for me. I think 95% of the world has to be sat down in a seat and taught something. I think the other 5%, mostly probably the entrepreneurs of the world, aren't patient enough to sit down and learn. So for the people that need the schooling, I think it's there for them. And I think it's the right schooling where it's creating that and people can improve their entrepreneur mindset from there. I do think we're failing. Like I think I got my Harvard education in my first business. I didn't understand cash flow until I actually had to start paying the bills, right? You learn real quickly when it's a reality, and you can't hide from it. There's no D's in that grade. It's either pass or fail, and you get your education through trial and error. Schooling system doesn't set you up for the real world. It'd be the equivalent of like hitting balls on a golf range. Well, that's school. Playing 18 holes in the U.S. Open, that's the real world, right? You can prepare all you want, but until you have to hit one off the first tee, life changes a lot there.
We're avid golfers, Nick. It feels like we're playing 18 holes on the US Open every time we play any course. So just on the golf, actually, this is a nice little segue for us. So you mentioned that you got a scholarship to play golf. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that then. Obviously, you must be pretty competent as a golfer then. Was that your passion growing up from a sports side of things?
I think so I started playing in like 6th, 7th grade, and by the 9th grade, I was on varsity and by sophomore year, I was the #1 player in our school. By senior year, I was league MVP. Junior year, I got 3rd in county, CIF. And then I actually walked on to Cal State San Marcos, broke their walk-on records. In fact, they're supposed to only bring one person on. Me and another kid both broke the record and ended up bringing 2 on. The other kid was only a couple behind me, and he was a few under for the weekend of the recruiting of the walk-ons. So from there, I by the 2nd semester, I had a scholarship. I qualified for all the tournaments, and I think somewhere between having to get up and go to school every day for free and having to golf, which I love doing, I just kind of lost the passion, understood that I didn't want to do it 10 hours a day. I love golfing, once a month, twice a month, even today. And I still played a scratch golfer, but because I played so much for so many years, and you actually get better. Your mental game's better now because it doesn't matter. You don't throw clubs. You just deal with, that's where reality is today. And you actually think about the game more than you actually just play it. I watch videos all the time and pick up little tidbits like, how did I not know that 20 years ago? That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So you start to appreciate the game more. But I grew up playing with Anthony Kim and Cameron Trinigale. I used to kick Cam and Anna's brother's butt all the time, but they're obviously a lot better now. And you grew up playing against these guys. David Yoon was a kid locally who was #1 in the nation for juniors. Very talented guy. Paul Amandi played multiple mini tours throughout. So it's like there's 5 or 6 guys that I grew up playing with that, I'd be putting for dollars on the green at the local golf course and these guys ended up, being professionals. I was as good as most of them, but I just didn't have the passion. They had the passion to do it. I'm passionate about what I'm doing today, and I do it well more than 10 hours a day.
Yeah, aye. Can I ask a question, Nick, on something else that you mentioned around working with family? Again, we've had many podcast guests that suggest that working with family is incredibly difficult and challenging, and that actually most people assume that when there's a family member in a business, they get an easy ride, management turn a blind eye, but actually the reality is often the opposite. They're worked harder, they need to prove themselves that wee bit harder. What's your experience? You did touch on it, but open up on that a wee bit. What's your experience in both working in a family member's business and now hiring members of your own family and your own business?
Yeah, well, I coached my little brother's Little League for 7 years, so we have a different relation. I'm 39, he's 24 today. So it's more of almost a fatherly role than a brotherly role. And as we're getting older, it's turning more brotherly than fatherly. But, he's the only employee in the business I can spank and not get HR call me. And he also doesn't have the option to quit. So we've had that conversation. He's he's very mature for his age at 24, but that generation thinks that they should be a pilot or a spaceship, or they should be an entrepreneur making $1 billion a year at 23. So it's how about you sit in a seat for 3 to 5 years and show that you can do something on a day-to-day basis and commit. So I think if you asked him, his opinion may be different, but he started at the very lowest level we have, which was he was calling and booking appointments for our direct consumer service side. And he did that for about a year longer than he wanted to. And he got really good at handling objections. And that was the goal, was can you take no's and turn them into yeses, right? And get real familiar with doing that 10,000 times. Once you do that, you're ready for the next step. And now he's one of our top sales reps, selling service work for $3,000 to $5,000 per ticket. And he sells, close to 300 grand a month of that. He's one of our top 2 out of 5 guys right now. And it's fun to watch it. It is, because I think he turned into a quote unquote man while being here. I don't want to use any more strange analogies, but he toughened up a ton, and he wasn't, I don't think, capable before he got here. And now I think he's found a passion to work. I think he's found a passion to want to do more with his life. So that part's been great for me to watch. On top of that, he's one of our top producers. And we know the job security is good. So, if you asked him, maybe he's got a different opinion about it. But I do think, as the parent or fatherly figure or older brother figure in that relationship, whoever's hiring the other person, it is our duty to set the precedent that you're not going to get a free pass here. In fact, if you don't do your job, you're going to be fired. You're going to have to go somewhere else. So setting expectations are important. And letting everybody else know that, at this point, 2 years after he's been here, no one looks at him as my little brother. They look at him as one of our top producers. So that's hats off to him, right? He earned that, not me. So, but I think it's our duty to make it harder on them. And I think a lot of people do think it's easier, because there probably are instances where it is easier, right? I had to work here for 30 years to be a vice president. You were a vice president in a week. Some people have resent about that type of stuff, but not here at EnergyAid. He started at the lowest level and he had to earn it.
All right, good, mate. And something else you mentioned actually was around your first business venture, which was a monumental fail, I think you said. Talk to us a bit about what that business did, and upon reflection, why did it fail? what would you change if you could go back? Again, just open up a bit on that and tell us a bit more.
Yeah, I think if you look back, and I've shared this in a couple of recent podcasts, I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't know where to find it. So I think as I get more into business, the more I realize how stupid I am and how stupid I was yesterday. It's easy to assume I'll be stupid tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
I think as you get more mature and more experienced with that, you start to understand what matters, what actually is, and stop lying to yourself about how great you're doing, because the P&L tells you how great you're doing. And if you're not winning there, you're not winning. So it's like, being down 7-3 in a baseball game in the 8th inning, go, oh, we really hit the ball well today. Like, no, you didn't. You're down by 4. So I think so understanding some of that stuff as I get older, I wasn't mature enough to understand how important thinking was in the business. We call it 40 in and 40 out. We kind of demand from our leadership that 40 hours are you at the office. I don't need you here 60, 70 hours. 40 hours in the business doing your day-to-days. But outside of the business, you should be equally thinking about the business. So when you show up, you're prepared. So making time to think about the business and the processes and higher levels when there's not noise around you. Now, if you're at your kid's soccer game, I don't want you thinking about work, right? But when your kid goes to bed and your wife's watching TV, go read a book, go watch some YouTube, go think about a business problem for an hour or two, rather than watching, the Orange County Housewives for an hour with your wife. Take time to think about the business and make time to think about the business on your personal time. That was one thing that, I'm fortunate to have that with kind of half custody with my kid. Half the time I have no time to think about that, and half the time I have a lot of time to think about that. So I think for me, thinking and making time to think about the business, a lot of times problems seem very overwhelming, but if you can kind of dissect them, they don't really become problems. They just become part of the chess game. Yes, you're down a couple pieces, but you're not out of the game yet. What's the next best move? You keep making the next best move, you tend to win the game. So making time to kind of think through the chess moves of what's coming up, what can you control, what can you not. I think cash flow, understanding just financially gap versus cash versus accrual, financial modeling, forecasting. Holy crap, I had no idea what a forecast even was for a budget going forward. We now carry a rolling 12-month forecast at all times. It's like driving in the dark without lights on. Horrible idea. That's what not having a financial forecast for the next 12 months for your business is. And if you're not capable of doing that stuff, here's not the next item is not knowing what I needed, right? So we brought on 5 good investor advisors, like 3 of them are CPAs. One of them was the head of mergers and acquisitions for Arco Oil for 25 years. Very astute investor and businessman. And we learned a lot about how to measure gross margin and operating income and technician margin, what labor in an 8-hour period we need to do. A lot of these metrics that maybe weren't prepared to actually measure, including cash. And I think it goes back to like one overall thing is I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't know how to find those people and put them in. And it's a lot around what are your weaknesses and who can be good at those items. You need to if you're bad at managing money, get 3 of the most stringent investor advisors who are really good at managing their money, and you'll be forced to manage your money better. Some of those things.
I guess when you have a failed venture, especially when it's your first, I would imagine it's the easiest thing in the world to go, right, I tried it, it didn't work out, I just need to find a job, earn a good salary, build my career that way. So what I guess gave you the encouragement to continue and try again rather than just throwing the towel in and going, right, actually I tried and it didn't work out?
So there's like this book, Measure What Matters, and it talks about OKRs. We're working on like an OKR management system. There's another book similar to that I read called, it talked about like Susie's Cakes. Susie was really good at making cakes. And her family goes, you should start a business for selling cakes. And it's this great idea. She starts a business, puts together $50,000 in life savings, opens up a bakery. And then about 6 months later, Susie's at Saturday afternoon at 1 a.m. crying on her baking floor. And she's sitting there, doesn't know how to solve her problem. And what she didn't realize is that cakes had nothing to do with running a cake business. It had absolutely nothing to do with what she was. Because she was good at cake does not mean that she was good at running a business. She needed to be good at managing people. She needed to be good at managing processes. She needed to be good at not doing cakes, everything else. And that kind of stood out to me of, thinking through the business, the failed venture, that I think most people who get in that position, who did take the leap to kind of get into business, end themselves in Susie's shoes of, I never want to be on the kitchen floor at 1 a.m. crying again. And there's ways to fix that. You're not necessarily going to end up there again. I can assure you, if you don't try again, you won't end up there. But you also won't get to what you want to accomplish, which is really the end goal. Where's your rocking chair going to be one day, and go get it. You're not going to do that by taking another job. There is a lot of great job opportunities where you can create businesses inside businesses. I try to share that with our team members of, you're running the sales. This is your sales business inside of our business, and here's your gross margin and PML to prove it. So there's ways to create businesses inside businesses and still get that satisfaction and growth and a good portion of the opportunity. You don't have the full risk. You're never going to get all the opportunity, but a portion of it.
You mentioned something there, Nick, about really key message, that you didn't know what you didn't know, and you didn't know how to find it. So you've mentioned quite a few things there around getting people in with the right skill sets, systems, processes. You mentioned about reading books to learn. So if someone's listening to this and they think to themselves, God, that sounds like me. I don't know what I don't know, and I don't know where to find it. What would you say to them? What would your advice be? How did you overcome that problem for yourself?
So I watched this video about 4 weeks ago, and it talked about pricing in a business. And the thing that stood out to me was they had stats that 97% of small businesses are not priced appropriately to even be in business. So short term, the number one thing I would do is raise your prices to an uncomfortable level. Make yourself understand that you continue to underestimate your costs, and raise your price until everybody tries to leave you, and then go try to find some new customers. And keep raising it, probably. So,
I love that.
Yeah, short term, I think pricing is the biggest thing that businesses fail on. Long term is educate yourself. You got to invest in yourself and understand that the business is you. And really try to put in people that where your failures or your lack of is. If you're not good at sales, put in a good salesperson into leadership. If you're not good at accounting, put a good accounting person in. So try to put in experts that can do. Very few people in a business are really good at the 5 or 6 categories they manage, right? Like today I manage IT, accounting, like just sales, marketing, operations, COO reports to me. So I'm not as good as those people in those categories, but I have to be educated in them. I have to be good enough to understand if they're doing a good job. So I think short term, raise your prices. That's the one thing I learned. And really understand your costs. That you have to understand your costs. I mentioned this in a couple other videos I just did too, podcast wise. Go pull up your QuickBooks or your bank account and review your costs monthly. Don't be afraid of what you're going to find. Don't be afraid of how long it's going to take. Understand your cost and really start to compartmentalize those costs into, are they fleet? Are they technician costs? Are they regional? Are they corporate costs? Really, even if it's just small levels, break it down and start to understand your margins and gross margins and your margins and cost for fleet, your cost of technicians, your cost of overhead, your cost of offices. Understand all those costs, because when they start to go up, you understand that I have a problem here or something's off. You end up saving so much in just the knickknacks, and put procedures in place at a certain point. The long term, but like we talked about, you gotta figure out how to get better yourself up top. You got to educate yourself. You've got to ask for, the quickest thing you can do is try to learn from others' mistakes, right? So how do I lower my learning curve by understanding that I always have a learning curve?
Yeah, I think that ties in with something you said before as well, Nick, which I really liked. So you're not going to pull wool over our eyes. We know that you're not stupid, right? Because you can't have your business the way you are if you didn't have some brains up there. But your mentality around, I'm going to flip it. Instead of your mentality thinking you're stupid, you're thinking there's always something to learn. So do you think that's a really healthy place to be as an entrepreneur or even a professional of, you know, the day you think you know it all might be the day you start declining? So is it always about keeping that learning mindset and always being looking for the next lesson?
I think that's a great way of putting it,
What'd you
Barry.
say?
You know, it's just understanding that I didn't know as much as I thought yesterday. And if I think I'm going to know more tomorrow, I'm a fool. I think you put it in a very, you summarized it better, and I'm probably going to use your summary going forward. How do I explain it? That was a good Cliff Note version of what
More than welcome to use that, Nick. I just made it up, but it's yours now, mate.
Sorry, no, it's trademarked. It's trademarked. Right, EnergyAid. So we'll get into a bit of a discussion about what you're doing, kind of the scale of that business now. But before we do that, Nick, talk to us a bit about the origins of EnergyAid. So I know that you've got a couple of co-founders. Where did the idea of EnergyAid come from? Are you doing now what you originally set out to do? Just talk to us a bit about how that came to be.
So EnergyAid hires, trains, and deploys residential service technicians to fix solar batteries and EV at one point. So we're the first person trying to prove out solar as an acquisition model. Today we do about 600 service appointments, California, Arizona, which is somewhere around 12 to 15% of the U.S. population in the southwest region of the U.S., for those of you over the pond. We have about 35 technicians, almost 103 people working on the business 40 hours or more a week. I say that because we have members in the Philippines who are technically outsourced, but full-time for us. We have members in Mexico who are full-time for us, but not our employees. But we have about 103 people working on the business today. It happens quick. We need more technicians. We started this understanding that there was a few investment theses. One was we believed the solar industry was going to keep growing. At what percentage, who knows? There may be dips at certain points like we're having right now in the US market. And the second investment thesis was we believe this is a service business long term. And by service business, I mean similar to the plumbing, HVAC, electrical service businesses that are very prevalent. You guys have a rescue rooter, rotor rooter in your market? Or just a large like plumbing entity?
Yes, in short. HVAC, not so much, primarily because it rains probably 90% of the year, so there's not much aircon getting used. Probably more in commercial buildings, but plumbing definitely, yes.
Yeah, there's the big industry for gas heating, which comes under HVAC over here.
It's a service acquisition model, the plumbing. Everybody has plumbing. You're not going to go, really, unless you go through a new home builder market, you're really not going to go out there and sell someone their first plumbing unit. So the HVAC industry in the United States is very prevalent on that. You go out, you $99 to unclog their drains, you fix their current issue, and the whole goal is predicated on long-term solutions and selling them the most optimum long-term solution. So you got long-term, short-term, and then do nothing. But it's all predicated on the upsell process of we've identified an issue and there's usually a root cause to that issue, and then how do we help you solve the larger issue? The solar industry is going to be a service acquisition model, and when everybody has solar, it's going to be predicated on how do we increase the long-term value of our customer base, monetize it, and how do we acquire new customers through service. So that seems inevitable to us. That's kind of the two main reasons why we started EnergyAid. We've learned a lot. We do about half B2B, so asset managers, and half B2C, direct to consumer. And I think we're by far the largest direct consumer repair company in the United States right now. My guess is our next competitor is doing about 20 customers to 30 customers a week. We're doing over 200 on the direct consumer side.
I know that when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, Nick, you gave me a lovely overview of the current state of solar in California. For the audience and for Barry, I guess, talk to us a bit about the shape of solar in California at the moment. I know that it's streets ahead in most states in the United States, but just talk to us a bit about current position and potential kind of headspace.
There was a lot of legislation change in California, and California is one of the biggest drivers of the market. The large entities are at least a quarter, maybe even 40% in the California market. And trying to diversify nationwide. And we had what's called NEM 3.0, Net Energy Meter, is the third version of this. And what it did is it basically paid consumers for excess energy at the rate they deserved. And the whole industry is going to hate me for saying that, but imagine you went into your local steakhouse and you brought in an uncooked $15 filet and you said, give me $65. You would sound like an absolute lunatic. The solar industry has been doing that for the past 20 years. And finally, the utility said, no, I'll give you $15 for that uncooked $15 steak. And they basically are paying you dollar for production and consumption. But once you start producing more than you're consuming, they're now paying you at a rate that is fair to them. So long term, this was inevitable. The rest of the nation is going to start to follow it. We can't keep robbing from Peter to pay Paul. It's not long lasting with the utilities who are our infrastructure to distribute all this power beyond batteries that we have eventually. And what ended up happening with that and finance rates going up is we created this perfect storm of a 4 or 5 year return on investment, 1 to 7, 8 years. So because of that, here we are where there's just not enough customers that financially makes sense to, and you have all the same amount of quantity of installers, if not more. So now the 10-gallon barrel of water for 50 fish now went to a 3-gallon bottle of Evian water. And all these companies can't survive in that atmosphere. And what's happening is companies are going out left and right. We've already had 6 of the top 20 in the United States go out in the last 12 months. The SunPowers, the Titans, ADT's out of it. Solcia, Sunlux, like there's just a plethora of companies going out of business right now. And Lumia was one we just heard the other day. And it's growing. And we think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And a lot of it's basically because if you were kind of selling 100 jobs a month at 25 grand per job, you were doing 2.5 million per month. And you had all the fixed cost of vehicles and offices to support that. Well, now the way the system is you're still going to sell that 25K, but you have to add a battery onto it in most of the market. So now you've got 40 grand. That sounds positive. Well, now you're selling 25 customers a month. So your 100 went down to 25, and you're selling now from 25,000 to 40,000. So you went from 2.5 million in revenue a month to $1 million. And that's a 40% drop in revenue. And a lot of people had fixed cost well above 40%. When you talk about all the vehicles, all of the equipment, all of the inventory, like everything they had, really hard to shed all those costs with that big of a drop they weren't prepared for. So that's led to a very dark time in the solar industry, but also a very opportunistic time. Us as a service provider couldn't be in a better place at the worst time, at a good time for us, worst time for the industry.
Yeah, that was actually going to be one of my questions, Nick. So those questions you meant, companies that you spoke about there, I take it we're all focused on selling new solar installations. So they were more of a sales and installation company rather than a service company like yourself. Is that right?
Yeah, 99.9% of the industry is a sales and installation business.
Yeah.
New systems.
And when those businesses go out of business, does that then mean that the warranties that are in place for those consumers are out the window, hence that creating an opportunity for your business? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, they're abandoned customers, right? So there's four ways we call abandoned. One is the manufacturer went out of business. Two is your installer went out of business. Three is you just bought the home and you have no idea who installed this thing 7 years ago. So you're just an unknowing abandoned. And then the fourth is a good old fashioned, I'll never use them again. They did such a bad job. I don't care how much they cover my warranty. I'm going to call someone else because the service was so bad and it took them so long. And they're just, I don't trust them. So those are your four abandoned. The biggest one right now, obviously, is the out of business. SunPower had 500,000 customers of 5 million nationwide we have. So 10% of the market was abandoned in one day. Titan Solar Power had close to 200,000. That's 4% of the market. So just in those two companies, 14% or 14 out of 100 people were abandoned in a few months. If you take in all of the other customers, like ADT is actually still servicing to protect their home security business warranties. But there's been probably another 5-10% of the, like 25% of the customers have been abandoned in the last 12 months. You take that with the previous abandoned numbers, you now have 40-50% of the market doesn't have a home to service their warranty.
And how many people in California, or how many domestic roofs, for example, in California do you think currently have solar?
So there's about 11 million single-family dwellings, residential homes. We're coming up on 1.8 to about 2 million right now. So there's conflicting data of like 2022. There's 1.5 million. I heard 1.8 the other day. So we're somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million, about 15 to 20% of the homes.
Yeah, so that is dramatically higher than the UK when you look at percentage wise.
But I think California is also a huge outlier in terms of the United States. Is that right?
Very much. First adopter, a lot of money, and a lot of political views of the environment. So I think that perfect storm of big incentives that came early and everything else. California is by far leading the nation in many aspects in residential solar. You go into the Alaskas of the world, there's 10 solar systems up there. So I think it just depends on where you're at. The Montanas probably have 10,000, there today. So I think we're just an outlier versus the UK in terms of we've had more time and more focus in California.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned about huge incentives. So we've spoke about this a few times about what's it going to take for the UK to really drive this forward. Me and Brian have had some random thoughts come into our head about, they should do this, they should do that. But we could probably learn from California when you mention around huge incentives at the start. So what sort of things did the government and California itself do to try and get people to adopt solar?
California and the federal government have had multiple incentives. So when you go back to 2001, they had the CSI, California Solar Initiative, and they had this EPB calculator, and basically it started about a 40% rebate, worked its way down to like a 0% rebate, all the way up to about 2010, 2011 or something like that. And it was a declining scale. The federal government put a tax credit in somewhere around 2006, I want to say. They're at $2,000 cap, and then it went to 30% years later after the solar rebate CSI programs were gone. So they just constantly have thrown incentives at this. And it's kind of a...
And how does that work? Nick? Because it's probably... So when you say like a 40% rebate, is that you get money back based on 40% of your capital investment, or is it based on 40% of the energy you produce, or how does that work?
Yeah, so this is long gone, but this is how it was in the late 2000s. So if you bought a system for 10 grand, they would give you anywhere between 500 and 4 grand as a rebate a few months later. Some companies were actually even fronting that money and just taking the rebate themselves and taking it off your bill towards the end of it because it was getting smaller. And just simplified the process, and then the burden of proof was on the installer at that point. The tax credit is not a write-off. It's a dollar-for-dollar tax credit. You have to pay money in to get it out. So if you made 100 grand and your paycheck was $2,000 a week, let's just say for simple numbers, and your paycheck came back at $1,400 into your bank account, right? So you were taxed $600, 30% roughly, and your take home was $1,400 of that $2,000. Well, you're paying $600 a week in taxes. You pay $30,000 over the course of the year. You will now be eligible. Let's say you do write-offs that get you down to $20,000 in taxes, right? Down to $70,000 after you write off some home payments and everything else. So you're going to pay off like $20,000 in taxes in that scenario. Well, you can take advantage of a $10,000 tax credit, right? Versus someone who doesn't pay taxes can't take advantage. You do have a few years to take advantage of it. So you got to put money in to get it out. That's rule number one. And it's a tax credit, not a write-off. So it's not like you're taking your taxable income from 100,000 down to 9. All you're getting is about $3,000 or $4,000 for that. It's a dollar for dollar credit. You will get $10,000 back from the government if you paid $10,000 in. And that's an example like a $33,000 30% tax credit, $33,000 system. If you paid $100,000, you'd have a $30,000 tax credit. If you paid $10,000, you'd have a $3,000 tax credit. So it just depends on the size too.
Is that still in place right now?
That's running through 2032 or
Right,
2030
okay.
or 2032, something like that. Long time.
Right, okay. That's interesting. Because, I guess you only know what you know. To use your term, it was 40% by the sounds of things once upon a time. It's now 30. It's 30 more than the UK residents get. We get diddly squat at the moment. There's really no such incentive. But as Barry said, something that I won't go as far to say it keeps us up at night. I sleep like a baby, to be honest. But I just think that if we're going to get serious about this drive to net zero, and I know, again, when we caught up a couple of weeks ago, you spoke about your vision of, 30 years from now or 50 years from now, every home having solar and battery and an EV charger in some way, shape or form. If that's ever going to be realised in nations like the UK in particular, I just can't see a way that it happens without proper government incentives, which is something that we're really lacking this side of the pond just now.
Time cures all that, right? I think if you look 100 years from now, it's pretty unlikely that California wasn't done 60 years ago and what they're building out, and you guys haven't had a good portion, if not all of yours, built out by then. So I think what happens is the rates continue to grow, and the cost of materials, the cost of labor can go up appropriately, but I think the utility rates are going up faster. And the grid just needs a better solution long term, especially when we put EV vehicles. So my guess is the EV grows quicker than the solar does. And in doing so, it starts to increase the demand on the load, which then, and the utility bills start to double. And that starts to push people towards solar, but kind of force people towards solar. So I think some of this will solve itself probably for you guys through the EV market. It'll create demand, and then utility rates will start to rise because of all these spikes. Well, now we need batteries to help lower those spikes. And I think that once again, the free market kind of solves that in time. When? That's the question mark. Obviously not yet.
Yeah. So do you think that you mentioned about the grid setup? I remember reading about, the capacity requirements for the grid to get everyone to EV and solar adoption. And you mentioned that EV might drive that pressure onto the grid quicker than solar. Is that right? Can you elaborate on that? Just explain how, for anyone listening, how that would work then? How the grid needs to evolve to support mass adoption, really?
Yeah, so in California, for example, when I talk about California, because it really is kind of the leader of the United States. If you talk about California, you're probably talking about everything else. And in California, the solar and the batteries have kind of beat the EV to market. So we are building in partial systems. When I say by partial is, today, the 15% of Californians have a $25,000 solar system. Well, long term, they're going to need a $50,000 solar system, 50,000 of batteries, and a his and her car charger. So it's over $100,000 of the $25,000 system they have today, if they even have that system. And there's very low, like 1% attachment on batteries, and that's more like one battery versus the 2 or 3 they need. 10 kilowatt instead of 30 or 40 kilowatt battery bank. So we're kind of doing this separate of you. You're kind of EVs going to push your solar market forward. Well, our solar market is kind of pushing EV forward. And
Right, got you.
what's happening is the solar market's starting to sell EV with it. They're trying to streamline products manufacturer wise. So now your solar, battery, and EV unit are all by the same person. And they're trying to set up for the longer term home. So we're kind of pushing this EV market in the ops direction of you guys, where your EV is pushing the solar, our solar is kind of pushing the EV. And I think it just depends on where you're at and what the utility rates are, what the legislation is, what the incentives are, and who's trying to approach that. I can assure you California and the US are not number one in solar adoption. We're up there, but we're not number one. So someone's doing it better than we are, or for a reason why. So I think time cures everything, Barry and Brian. You know, I think you guys are going to get there. It's just a matter of when.
I had a question on, it sounds like California's been at it a while. And I guess with that, some of the systems that you must go out and see are pretty aged in nature. Does that present a problem around retrofitting newly manufactured kit with really aged kit? Is that an issue, or is it you know, I'm non-technical here, right? So I don't quite know what the terminology is, but even the word retrofit is quite a stretcher for me. I like using it.
I'm laughing, Nick, because he put a microphone on my desk in the office, so one of those clip-on microphones you sit here, and he walked away with a big smile on his face saying, I've just retrofitted that microphone.
Oh God, here we go, my chair's away. It definitely was a retrofit. Anyway, but does that present a challenge when you go out to a system and it's maybe 20 years old and they're not quite manufacturing kit like that anymore? Like, how do you circumvent that?
Yeah, it's a big issue. The two biggest things that stand out is kind of, we want to get to the point where we can start to sell this stuff quicker. And I think some of the industry thinks they're going to do it in-house, like the plumbing industry does. Plumbing industry is much different than the solar industry. Plumbing, you got copper, you got PVSC, you got rights, lefts, extended. A lot of it's mechanical that you can carry on a vehicle. When you get into the solar side, well, now there's 27 manufacturers and 27 batteries and 27 monitoring systems. And you need a whole warehouse to stock all of that. You can't do it in a vehicle. So I think some of the limitations of what you're trying to build out there, you have degradation of the panels. That starts to lead to a voltage operating range equation of how you engineer and pair new equipment with old equipment. You have different ranges of the voltage direct current of the engineering of it. So there's a lot of different factors that kind of limit what we can do to retrofit from old equipment. Positively grounded sun power roof tiles. You're not retrofitting that, you're taking it off. There's just some stuff you don't even retrofit with. And the hardest part of all of it is finding old parts and new parts that marry. So like an old 2005 solar inverter, it's like finding a 1917 T-model Ford bumper. You're just not going to find it.
Yeah.
And a 2012 is like a 1967 Mustang bumper. You're just not going to find many. So you're having to figure out how to bring in manufacturers that aren't even out of business and really figure out what is the solution for that product for what the customer issue is. That's the complicated part of it, of how you get into and figure out how do we retrofit this? Is it retrofittable? And what's the cost analysis to the customer of just putting a new one in? Is that worth it? Does it even make sense to go repair this if it's not going to work in 2 years? And we don't know all those answers yet. We're learning, but you know, they're supposed to last 25 years, this equipment, right? The panels are not really the issue. At what point do they start replacing the old ones with new ones completely? Is that 15, 20, 25 years? I doubt it's past 20. I bet it's more closer to 10 or 15.
Right, okay. Yeah, that's interesting because when you think about warranty, you think from a consumer perspective, I'll tell you my point of view. When you go 25-year warranty, I can put them on my roof and forget about them for 25 years. But I take it that's not the reality. As you say, they can start to reduce in performance. You might need to think about investing in new ones after 10 to 15 years, did you say, for panels?
Yeah, I think somewhere between the 15 and 20 mark at the latest, but I think there'll be a lot of pressure to push around the 10 to 15 mark. It's easier to sell someone something like, especially for the lease PPA side, the larger asset managers who are trying to have 20-year leases in place, they're probably going to sell around the 10 to 15 year mark before the customer has leverage. When you look at the purchase side, they'll probably try to get you out between the year 15 and 20 mark. Hey, this just isn't making sense to you anymore. You don't really have the leverage like the PPA lease has, where they want to kind of catch you on the upside of still having an asset versus a liability. Because once it's a liability, you have all the cards in your hand. They need to get that thing off the roof. It's costing more to maintain it than it is performing.
I see what you mean. So the PPA market you're talking about, there's a few different PPAs in the solar industry over here, but are you talking about consumer finance and how they pay for the system, or talk to us how that works?
So PPA, power purchase agreement, and then lease. Those are kind of the standard, like traditional lease for a vehicle. Those are the two mechanisms of how we do a lease for solar, a lease or a PPA. So you're either paying for the power or you're paying for the equipment. Lease is equipment, PPAs, you're paying for the actual power produced. And they come with performance guarantees, and they maintain the monitoring, which is the big one. And that's those customer base, I believe, are going to be sold and cycled out much earlier, especially as they try to add on more to those.
And power purchase agreements in the United Kingdom are primarily for commercial buildings, wind farms, large manufacturing facilities, care homes. Do you have PPAs in place for domestic properties in California, or is it primarily commercial also?
Yeah, they're actually mainly residential, single-family dwelling lease and PPAs. About half the market.
Right.
So
okay.
We got 5 million solar customers nationwide. And we talked about 2 million being in California. So there's about 11 million single-family dwellings. 2 million have solar in California. We got about 110 million single-family dwellings in the United States. 5 million. So 3 out of 100 in the rest of the nation. 2 out of 11 in California. Right, so we're about 15-20% California, about 3% the rest of the nation, about 5% of the total nation. It's different. In California and New Jersey were kind of the first indicators of that. I don't know if they answered your question, Brian. I think I went off on a tangent there a little bit.
No, that's okay. You did to a certain extent. My question was pretty simple, which is, in the UK, to my knowledge, I could be wrong, and maybe somebody for the audience will pick up on this and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have power purchase agreements in place for residential properties in the UK at all. If we have, I've never encountered them. We do have PPAs in place, but they're primarily for large facilities that use, I was going to say, excuse my French, but excuse my Glaswegian, a shitload of electricity. So that I was interested to unpick that. And is that still an option for people who are interested in solar in California, or is that just a legacy thing?
Yeah, traditionally it kind of goes from like 80% leases to 20% leases, 80% leases. And it just kind of varies back and forth, but we've been kind of consistent for since about 2006 when the leases came in the market. So the last 18 years, we're about 50-50, 50% third-party ownership, which is a lease or PPA, and 50% cash or unsecured or secured financing. So 50% purchases, 50% third-party ownership.
Right, that's interesting. And just to unpick that a bit, let's say I'm a California resident, I'm interested in solar, I want to go down the leasing or PPA route. So it's third-party ownership. Is the primary benefit that I then just secure a long-term below market rate for my electricity? I don't own the kit, but I benefit to the tune of paying, for example, I don't know, 10 cents per kilowatt rather than 30. I'm making numbers up, but
yeah, that's so PPA is you pay for the kilowatt hours produced, and you have a minimum payment they're going to give you for that power each month, like 90% of what they think it's going to produce. So they give you some type of guarantee they're going to maintain it properly. So you're not just doing this, it's producing nothing. You just got this paperweight on your roof. On the lease side, it's very much like a car lease where you just pay, hey, my bill was, $200 a month previously. I put in a 5-6 kilowatt solar system, and now my solar payment's 130 and my utility bill went from 200 down to 20. So my net of utility bill and solar is 150 versus 200, and I fixed my rate for the next 25 years versus a 5% increase every year. So that's why people do the leases. And you have a dollar buyout in 20 years. Some of them have that. Some of them fair market value. The reality is you're going to have all the control of getting that thing replaced with a new one. So you're always going to have the latest, greatest, and probably earlier than you think.
All right. Well, that's interesting, isn't it?
It makes it a bit more readily available for residents, because over here it's you either have the cash or you get the finance or you're not getting it.
Yeah.
So these are a bunch of
it's good to have
zero-down
those
programs,
options.
right? So there's no money out of pocket and you save day one. So my guess is that's coming to your market. It's just a matter of when it makes sense to do so. So, for example, if the lease payment was more than your utility bill savings, there wouldn't really be a lease market here in the United States. So my guess, somewhere between the incentives increasing, utility rates increasing, there'll be a lease positive opportunity in your market, which will then lead to lease finance companies coming into your market.
Yeah, that makes sense. But the finance that I've seen in our market, obviously with us being marketers, we do some ads for finance. A lot of the time it's not a long duration that they pay over, Nick. So it might be a 6 or 7 year finance agreement, so the monthly payments are fairly high. In the US market, is it similar, but there's just enough savings in the bill to justify it, or is it stretched over a longer period of time?
Yeah, so cash is always cash, right? There's you get what you pay for right then and there. A lot of the unsecured finance loans are 20, 25 years in the US market. So you have a 20-year 3.99, 5.99, 7.9, whatever they pay in the dealer fees to buy that down. And those tend to pencil day one. Now you can obviously do a 5-10 year unsecured instead of the 25-year, and you can pay it down quicker. The numbers we heard from the finance companies is the typical 25-year unsecured financing is out of it in 7.5. And I think a lot of that's around the home sale. So if you have the money, you're probably better off doing a shorter loan or cash. If you don't have the money, you might be better off doing a lease or a PPA. As you're probably, with purchasing a system, you're probably going to have to purchase it in the first 7 years based on the trends.
All right. Well, that was certainly interesting. We won't unpick the old finance and spend too long on it anymore. But that was definitely interesting, and I think, in summary, definitely some lessons for the UK there if we want to get serious about the old drive to net zero. But one thing I wanted to speak to you about, Nick, was we've touched upon the scale of EnergyAid now. I think you mentioned doing 500 to 600 service-based appointments a week now. How did you get to that size? Just talk us through the sequence and how you grew your business operationally to that size.
So we started with one office and 3 people painting walls in October 1st, 2021. By the beginning of 2022, we were doing 25 to 50 service appointments a week. And we had 4 offices covering all of California. So we quickly jumped up to cover all of California. And it was all B2B, no residential at all. We didn't start the residential until probably mid-2022. We didn't start growing the residential side until mid-2023, once we built out process and procedures. So we just kind of, every 3 months, we'd add a tech or 2. And before you knew it, kind of grew into 35 techs. We'd hit these revenue walls where we were stuck. We got the $30,000. Like, how are we going to get more than 25, 30, 50 service appointments a week? There's just not enough partners. There's not enough broken down systems, blah, blah, blah. And then we blew through to 80,000 a week in work. And then we hit that revenue wall. And then we blew through to 200,000 a week in work. And now we're doing close to $400,000 a week in work, and almost close to 450 this week. So you keep hitting these, and that's just service revenue. We haven't even really monetized the new installation side of selling these customers more panels, more batteries. We're working on that now. There's double the revenue in just monetizing that properly. So we're just trying to get really good at service. But it just kind of happened. We got 4 offices in California in like 3 months. We then added a San Diego office, got into Arizona, added a San Bernardino office. We're working on adding LA and Las Vegas, Nevada, the next 6 to 9 months. And we're having to make some of our NorCal offices a little bigger now too. And we just kind of kept growing it, step by step. The B2C, we never thought we were going to do. We never thought we were going to do R&Rs, and we just kind of kept understanding this ties into our business. But it's all been predicated on getting good at service. That's been our primary focus point, is how do we get really good at servicing solar systems? And if we do that, we like our chances.
I'll touch upon the fact that you did just say you were opening up an office in Las Vegas. I was going to say that I will market for you for free, but I will pay you to be your marketer as long as I can be based out of the Las Vegas office. Hopefully my wife doesn't hear this episode. But what I was going to ask there is, how do people find you? How do you market your services?
A lot of the traditional routes, I think we've just really focused on measuring well. So the Googles, the mail, we're doing direct mail. We've got a bunch of data we're buying. We buy every paid lead in the market from all the home advisors, Angie's, Thumbtacks of the world. Those aren't really, secret sauce in what we're doing. But we really started to understand our demographic and who buys a system and who leases a system. And what is the medium income household that we're trying to attack? There's actually a low point around 65,000, and we actually don't want anybody above 150,000 medium income. So there's like the top 5% of homes we don't want to target. There's not a good return on ad spend, and the bottom 15-20% we don't want to target. And a lot of that comes around who leases, who purchases their system, and who ends up buying service work from us after they actually get a service appointment from us. So understanding your demographic has been a big part of it, and really measuring everything. One of our philosophies is if we can't measure it, we don't do it. And I think a lot of people try stuff, maybe try too much on the marketing side. Oh, we should be doing this. Okay, well, how do you measure that? Oh, we should do this and that. And then they end up doing it. And we did some of these mistakes. Like we tried Facebook and Instagram for like 2 months and we punted on it right away. Well, 1, we would have never known in 2 months. And 2, we should have never done it because we didn't have a plan to measure it until we started doing it. So something, social media we'll get back into pretty heavy in the future. But until we can measure, and branding's really hard to measure. You have to be really good at what you're doing to measure branding.
The people that you service, do they typically buy from you when the system has broken down, or is there a service plan in place? So like I pay X amount per month, and as and when I need you, I pick up the phone and say, probably not to you anymore. You'll be grateful, but next team member, get somebody out to me as per my service plan. Or is it just, I've got a breakdown, when can you get somebody out to have a look at it for me?
So today it's the latter. They call us when they have an issue. We're working on integrating multiple monitoring platforms into one platform right now, and going to market the next few months with a membership plan. Something along the lines of $99 a year, and it includes priority scheduling and stuff like that. Some added benefits versus non-members. That's our goal there. But for the most part today, it's very much we go out and inspect the system for a fee, and then we give you that feedback if you end up doing service work with us.
Right. Got you.
Okay, that makes sense. And we, as marketers, we always talk about seasonal trends in the UK. When it's sunny, more people buy solar. When it's winter and Christmas, everyone's looking at Santa. Nobody's interested in solar. Some examples, not very good ones to be fair. But what I was going to ask you, Nick, is in regards to your service-based business, Is there any seasonal trends with work increasing or decreasing? Obviously, you mentioned when a big company goes out of business, that could potentially increase demand. But is there anything else that can create some seasonality in your work?
Yeah, I think when you look at HVAC, right, very clear that the HVAC unit knows when it's 100 degrees and has to operate at 3x the capacity it did in the winter. So there's definitely like seasonality in like an HVAC industry. The stuff that's breaking down for us is not really the panels. It's more of data communication devices, electrical equipment. And I would guess there's some type of seasonality, more sun damage, ends up wires get more exposed. But I don't think there's a ton of seasonality in terms of a system knowing if it's winter or summer, and I'm going to break down during summer for a reason. There are temperature coefficients that expand and contract wire and cause more issues there. My guess is there's a little bump up in the summer versus winter. But I don't think there's any data really saying that there's like an HVAC type of big separation of seasonality. Now, if you look at the consumer, our B2B and our B2C relationships, there's definitely seasonality there. So when the solar market starts to go down, our B2B business goes down. Well, how does that make sense, right? There's more opportunity maybe. Well, when our partners get slower, they tend to keep business in-house and use their service technicians themselves or make installer service technicians. So in the winter, when there's less new system sales, because summer has higher electric bills, more pain point, they're going to tend to subcontract less work during the slow season. And there's definitely a seasonality of when solar's sold at the peak season of summer when the electric bill's the highest pain point. When you look at the B2B side, it's real clear that our partners are going to give us less work during the winter. Therefore, there is some seasonality of summer being busier and winter being slower. The other half of our business, direct to consumer, I think the seasonality here follows more in line with consumer purchasing. People are just not trying to fix solar systems around December 25th and November, whatever the last Thursday of the month is. So it's just not a priority for them, and their money is going towards other things that they'll just hold off until they get into other parts of the year. Versus if it's not working during the summer, there's more of a pain point and there's more funding available. So there is a little bit of seasonality. My guess is 25% of it follows kind of the hot summer versus winter. More of it around the pain point. I want to fix it because it's hot out. My bills are high. My biggest returns now. Versus, I think 75% of it's consumer spending habits.
And something else I wanted to ask you, Nick, if that's okay. You mentioned earlier about the potential opportunity for you to grab some additional revenue through, and it's actually, I think that this is probably the smartest thing about your entire model is the service call almost gets you in the door. And whilst you're there, it's, did you know that if you had another battery, you could? Did you know that if you had more panels, you could? Is that something that you are actively, I guess, gunning for to grab some more revenue? Or is that something that you're still modelling out for future?
The market's tough right now. I think we're really short-term focused on a lot of things. There's stuff we'd like to do on the real estate market with home inspections and a couple other areas. But I think it's really important to stay short-term right now. There's a lot of muddy water. There's a lot of opportunity. And we really want to focus on taking advantage of the opportunity. And I think it's more important whenever when there's risk to stay focused on the one thing you're really good at too. I think that's what we're doing. We're short-term right now. A lot of uncertainty in the market.
We have touched on a lot of it, but we always like to give our guests an opportunity to just talk to us a bit about where does the future lie for EnergyAid. So some of it you mentioned today, additional add-ons, some installation work. You mentioned also opening up, I think, an office in Arizona. What does the next, say, 3 years look like for EnergyAid? Is it continuing to dominate the market in California and looking at other states across the United States? Or are there other grandiose ideas about even potentially venturing out with the United States? Just talk to us a bit about your future plans.
Yeah, our goal is to be the first nationwide large direct consumer service provider. We want to be Rescue Rooter, Roto-Rooter, your top plumber company nationwide for this service industry. So solar, batteries, and EVs, and home management. That's kind of the solar, HVAC, plumbing, electrical industry you traditionally have as service contractors. That's what we're trying to create, this industry. I think the best way for us to get nationwide is to focus in California and Arizona today. So we're trying to build up more of a defense wall in our primary market, ideally produce cash, produce operating income. And then once we've kind of solidified those defense walls and built up cash reserves, we're now more likely to go nationwide long term. So, some people are like, oh, I got to get nationwide tomorrow. No, you don't. You don't have to. We're better off if we want to get nationwide in 5 years, and let's call that, 10 states. Florida, Texas, and California kind of makes you a nationwide company today in the solar industry. So we want to get in 10, 15 states in the Sun Belt. I think the best way for us to do that is stay very focused on the 2 we have today. So I think that's kind of our long term, is to cover the entire Sun Belt at the appropriate time. But we are right now trying to fatten up California and Arizona the best we can and lower drive time.
Makes sense. It's exciting. And you mentioned obviously the solar market in the US is in don't want to say a downturn, but it's not quite as flourishing as what it once was. What do you think that market condition is going to have to change for you to realise your ambition of getting nationwide, or what do you see the future of the solar industry itself looking like maybe over the next? I know we've got a big election coming up, which is pretty soon over in America. But what do you think that's going to look like over the next few years, Nick? Do you think it's going to come back to maybe past levels of interest?
Yeah, I think the industry's multiplying its TAM, total addressable market, by 3 to 5x the next 15 years. So I think one thing that's happened is we talked about that $25,000 solar system going to $100,000 with solar, batteries, and EV vehicles. Well, that's 4x there. And I think the service industry is starting to become a bigger opportunity than people thought in terms of generating revenue on broken solar systems. So the TAM of this industry has dramatically increased. I think a lot of people would agree that we are electrifying the world over the next 100 years. We're already about 20 years in. And that this solar on-site production, on-site storage with his and her car chargers is probably on a pretty good path to go forward. A lot of people in the United States would have to be wrong from the political standpoint for it not to. And politicians tend not to tend to not like to be wrong. So I think as much money as we put in, I think we have enough friction to move forward. And I think when you look at where we're going to be in terms of the grid and grid issues, it's going to be dramatically needed. I met with someone the other day and I explained that $100,000 system, and he's a great way of putting it. He said, so what you're saying is these are necessities for life 10 years from now. And I said, yes. This is stuff that you're going to have, like a roof on your home at one point, in order to be able to afford your home. And looking at it that way, these are necessities for living 10, 20 years from now. You're going to need an EV car charger. You're going to need on-site storage. You're going to need on-site production. And as we start to build that out over 20 years in, another 80 years to come, we're electrifying America with solar, batteries, and EV. So I don't see that changing, Brian or Barry. I see it's going to take some time, and the question is, how are we mixing in the partial steps to, by 2060, 2080, which is probably a very likely fully established installation and service business model where everybody just calls it a solar company again. Versus today, a solar company does new installs and new sales. A repair company is more of an O&M, operation and maintenance provider. And the service industry today is actually a bigger opportunity than the new installation business because it's new installs and service.
I love it. I think it's very, very clever. There's certainly not, to my knowledge, certainly many organisations like that in the UK. I don't know that we have enough solar kicking about to facilitate companies like that flourishing today anyway. But I love that idea of it being like a wee, that's the thing that gets you in the door almost. And then I guess the opportunities associated with that are endless in time. I could genuinely just sit here and talk to you all day long, but I appreciate you're an exceptionally busy guy. So just a huge thanks from us for this side of the pond for making yourself available today. I know you are a huge hat guy, because every time I've spoke to you, you've had a hat on. And we would typically always present a guest with a risking it all hat. A money can't buy risking it all hat. But given that you're on the other side of the pond, we'll just need to meet you in that Las Vegas office. I'm determined to get there. And
we can hand you the hat in Las Vegas.
Yes.
Good luck explaining that to your wife. Babe, I have to go. I promised them a hat.
Yeah. It's tradition, and with it, tradition, what are we? So... so I'll meet you in Vegas. We'll pass that hat over. But thank you so much for coming on today. We've really appreciated it. Love speaking to you. All the best and good luck with, American domination with your service-based business. We'll keep one eye on you and your business for this side of the pond. And just thank you very much for being on today.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nick. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Barry. Pleasure.
No worries. Well, thanks as always to our listeners. We will be back next week with another episode. Give us a like, follow and share our socials as always, and check out Nick and EnergyAid on all his socials.